is Martha Murkison. She's minister of Second Presbyterian Church, as I like to call it, Sunrise Presbyterian, and is almost at her 10th year anniversary. She's going to tell us about her kind of study trip she made last year, and the title has to do with peace, justice, but not rock and roll, but maybe she'd slip some in because she does attend lots of live music and knows a lot about rock and roll.
I almost have all the footnotes at the beginning to say this is what I'm talking about, this is what I'm not talking about. I realize when I talk, I come as a theologian, which is a little different animal than we're used to doing and listening to. So I'm not a researcher, I'm not a historian, and what I'm presenting today is not researched history. That work is for other people to do, and in fact, I encourage you, if you are intrigued by it, to go upstairs and ask the fine research librarians that we have. We are very blessed with those librarians upstairs. Get them to help you. A pilgrimage is a trip taken for a spiritual reason. And so often it may be to pray or to worship at a certain place or to meditate or to pay homage, to go there. I go to New Mexico every summer on a pilgrimage to be in the desert, sort of as a cleansing spiritual pilgrimage. But last April, I read one Sunday afternoon the entire New York Times, as I like to do that on Sunday afternoons. And I was reading the art reviews, and I read a powerful review of the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, the New York Times, and the headline, I still recall it, says, "At this memorial, the monuments bleed." And I had to read it, and I was just mesmerized by the descriptions, the quality of the design. And I immediately clicked through and followed their links. And I came to the Equal Justice Initiative's website, and I found there the interactive map they have on the website of all of their documented lynchings in the U.S. Now, for EJI, their documented lynchings are 3 independent corroborated sources for each lynching. So that is not an exhaustive report, but it's what they have corroborated. And they have a map of the United States, and there's a red dot on every county. So what Abner didn't say about my history is I grew up in Dillon, South Carolina. And one of the painful parts of growing older is looking back on our history and learning about what my friends' fathers and mothers and my culture did or didn't do, and having to come to terms with that. So I sucked in my breath and looked at the map for Dillon to see how many people were lynched there. And there was no one. And I was like, wow. And then my eye drifted further west, and there's Kansas, and I know where Saline County is in Kansas, and we've got a red dot. And I knew at that minute that if we had a pillar in this memorial, I needed to go there and stand under it and weep. And so that was the purpose of the pilgrimage. There was nothing else. It was just I had to do that act. And as I made the decision to drive, friends who were from the area and others started suggesting places for me to go. I had a week off. I fit as much into the trip as I could, and it was a powerful trip. I'm not planning to talk about that. I don't think we'll have time, but if I do have time, I can tell you about some of the other museums and memorials, because I learned so much, and it was an opportunity to relive history that from the point, say when I was in the 4th grade, and then I could put actual news stories with what I recalled from Walter Cronkite. And it helped me put all this in an order. But the purpose today is really to talk about this. And so, let's see if I can make this work. I have first here a picture of a lynching. And this is actually in Waco, Texas. This is not in Kansas. I could not find any pictures of lynchings in Kansas on the web. I do not know that that means they don't exist, but they're not on the web, easily findable. And I put this up because I realized after the movie Black Klansman showed, and I hope you've all seen that, but they talk about the lynching in Waco. And I used to live in Texas, and I worked 25 miles north of Waco in Hillsborough. This was a picture from a postcard, and I realized after Black Klansman that many people here had never seen these pictures and did not know about lynchings and how they took place and how popular they were, and that people would actually take pictures and make a postcard and mail them to their relatives about, look what happened here today. And so I did that. I am a Presbyterian minister, and I realized looking at that map of red dots that every church I have served, and that's about 9 churches, other than in Upper Michigan, there has been a lynching in that county. And so I began to hear about them, not from my studies, and I've got 5 degrees. I don't ever remember a lecture on lynching, but I started hearing about them in Texas, either from congregants who came in telling me a story their granddad told them about how Snowball got lynched in Hillsborough, or about from horrified ministers who were hearing these stories about what happened in their towns not that long ago, because this is fairly recent history as history goes. So it did happen, and it happened here. And that's part of what we're going to talk about. So, the memorial, and I think for many people, if you haven't heard of Bryan Stevenson, is kind of a, how did this get here? Because it's not a government-owned memorial. Bryan Stevenson is the head of what's called Equal Justice Initiative, and this is his book. Oh, hit you. Oh, wait, let me go back. Equal Justice Initiative is committed to ending mass incarceration and excessive punishment in the United States, to challenging racial and economic injustice, and to protecting basic human rights for the most vulnerable people in American society. Bryan Stevenson began the Equal Justice Initiative. He is a lawyer who happened on in an internship in Alabama. Somehow he got these very difficult capital cases to prosecute, not to prosecute, to be a lawyer. And he trained, and he found there was something that just drew him in to take these free cases that no one else would take, to correct the injustices, the grave injustices, and to save some people from the electric chair at that time. This, let's go backwards. Just Mercy is a powerful book. If you have not read it, it's a hard read. Read it. There is also another book by Anthony Ray Hinton, whom it took, I think, 24 years for Bryan Stevenson to get off death row. There was no evidence whatsoever that he committed the crime. There was actually plenty of evidence that he didn't, that he wasn't even there. But Anthony Hinton's book, The Sun Still Shines, is quite good, and I recommend reading it, and that gives you an idea of some of what spurred Stevenson on to study this issue. The HAI spent the last several years writing this book, Lynching in America, Confronting the Legacy of Racial Terror. This is on the internet. If you just Google it, it's free. Don't try printing it because it's huge. But you will get a lot of information and pictures, and I encourage you to do that. So what Stevenson asks is, Stevenson asks the question as we look at lynching, and I think this is a very interesting question for lynching and for anything else we're doing in our culture, is how did we in this culture allow this narrative which allowed the terror of lynching to become normative in our country? You see, it was normative up until, say, 1930, that people could be lynched and terror mobs could inflict their terror. And we always say, well, we're Kansans, we didn't do that. Well, yes, we did. And the other thing he will say is that we are all implicated, because some of us want to say, well, we didn't do that. Stevenson would say we are all implicated when we allow other people to be mistreated. An absence of compassion can corrupt the decency for vindictive and abusive, unjust and unfair, until we all suffer from the absence of mercy. So it's something that impacts all of us. And so what I want to talk about mostly today is the memorial, which I found incredibly moving. And what I discovered, and my photos are not expert photos, but what I discovered is how the design and the construction of the memorial helps to do two things at one time. It offers dignity to all the thousands of people who were lynched and who were burned, who were splayed apart by wagons pulling on every limb. Unspeakable atrocity, but for us, not for a family, for people not to be given the dignity of a proper burial or treatment of the dead, however we do that. That's part of civilization, is to be able to treat our dead well. And so these poor souls need dignity, and I think we all need to give them that dignity, and this memorial does it. It also offers healing for acts of barbarity, and at the same time it holds in tension. There's a dialectic running with the awfulness of the terror. So there's these two things are going on, and I want to talk mainly about that. But of course, being a Presbyterian minister, I have something for us to do. And I don't have any plans about how this should be done. I just sort of trust that I can throw this out here and somebody will start picking up the ball and working on it, because I know y'all. And I know that this is something we could do. A couple of weeks ago, Father Michael Battle, who spent a great deal of time in South Africa with Desmond Tutu, was over at Christ Cathedral speaking about forgiving the unforgivable sin. And Michael Battle said, we can't forgive. These people are dead. So they can't forgive the country for what we did. But what we can do is become less naive about it. And we can be more in touch with the gravity of how we affect one another. So we can do that. And we also, following Padraig Atwama, whom I spent a lot of time reading, Padraig was one of the main reconcilers for the Troubles in Ireland, if you recall the difficulties, and they're kind of rearing their head again with Brexit. And Padraig writes, where there is separation, there is pain. And where there is pain, there is story. And where there is story, there is understanding and misunderstanding, listening and not listening. And so part of what we need to do simply is to tell the story, because we haven't told the story. I doubt you read about it in school. I don't think any of us did much, other than 2 sentences. So it's time to start telling the story. The memorial actually opens with the words, we will remember, for the hanged and beaten, for the shot, drowned, and burned, for the tortured, tormented, and terrorized, for those abandoned by the rule of law, with hope because hopelessness is the enemy of justice, with courage because peace requires bravery, with persistence because justice is a constant struggle, and with faith because we shall overcome. So this is an attempt to talk about a very difficult story. And of course, if you know me at all, you know that flowers blooming make up the bedrock of who I am, and I often share them. I laughed because my friends shared that I was talking today on Facebook, and only my friends from out of town wanted to come. And if I put a flower picture up within 10 minutes, 100 people will have liked it. So, you know, it's interesting. But when I got to the museum, to the memorial, these are flowers newly planted in the garden at the bottom of the memorial. And I kept hearing the students, they had graduate students being guides, talk about the fact that a garden will heal. They had taken stones from slave warehouses and made a beautiful garden wall and were planting a lovely English garden in Alabama with great perennials, really good. And so we began with a planting. Again, if we're going to give people dignity, what could give them more dignity than a garden and a beautifully tended space? And it was just very beautiful. So here's the memorial. And it's stunning up there on the hill, but it's also awful. I had my first glance at it reminded me of the prison at Ellsworth. I don't know if any of the rest of you go over there and look at that, but it's got that same shape of Ellsworth Prison. And it had that. It's stunning. It sits on the hill well. There will be a grove of trees around it. There will be plantings around it. I think it's just been open 2 months. But this is the memorial. Now, what the memorial, which is built very much like a pole barn, so open air gallows, it is a place of beauty, but yet it evokes what it is. And there will be, and I'll show you many of them, 800 steel columns. So for every one of those red dots on their map, there's a column for that county. They're made from steel, not stainless steel. It's steel that is rusted, and that's why the monuments bleed. And engraved in each one of those counties is, say, Florence County, South Carolina. And then there'll be the names and the dates, birth dates and death dates if they have them, for the people who were lynched in that county. And the configuration is just amazing. As you walk up to the memorial, so you start ascending this wonderful granite path, again, like the finest of cemeteries. I was struck, and it may be just because I spend a good deal of my working time in cemeteries, but at the great care and the use of very similar marbles and granites that would be used in a very nice cemetery, those types of things. But here we have the capture of enslaved people. The sculpture is from Ghana. I'm not going to do a whole art, but I was stunned on this trip at the use of bronze as an artistic media to convey horror. Normally we see bronze to convey beauty, pride, a general, something wonderful. This is just an incredible image, and how we have not allowed an image like that to go into our minds. Normally, we have a much tamer image of people. And there's another one. And again, I apologize for the shadows. It was bright summer morning, and I'm not a professional photographer. So.
And there are a few of those photos on the website that are...
Yeah, they're much better. And on their website, thanks, Ann, they have a little video of the Ghanaian sculptor about this and how he came to it and how he did it. By the way, the entire memorial, not the sculptures, was done by the Mass Design Group out of Boston. They have done work in Rwanda. I mean, they're just an amazing design group. So if we can, I can't see, once you walk into the memorial, this is coming dead on, and you can see the columns here. And this is as I walked in. What happens is the memorial, you enter the memorial on the second level of the memorial, and these columns that are going to be in straight lines, so begin to go in different lines. So it's very disorienting every time you turn around. You begin, I didn't mean to do that. You begin here, and as I walked in, you walk into the Alabama, that's by design, it's in Montgomery. You walk into the Alabama counties, and it's just right at eye level where you can see, say, Montgomery County and then all those listed. As I was walking, I walked into a lady who was weeping. I mean, most people are weeping when they go through this. And she knew she had an uncle no one knew what had happened to. And she discovered him, and it was the right dates, and it was the right county. And, you know, there's this strange woman I've never met before, and we hugged and wept. And the stories I can tell from being there. So you enter at eye level looking at these, and then you begin, you traverse across the width of it, but as you turn, the floor drops so that you look below, or you're walking below, and actually the columns begin to rise above you, and you get the feeling that someone is being hung. Because you turn around, and it's just every time you turn and look. This is a column of the states. I started learning more as I was going through it. I actually thought there would be columns for all the counties, and this is for all the states where there were lynchings and they have not hung a column, because if they had done that, the memorial would be huge. It would have been too big to hold. So this is a column of states where there were lynchings, and they don't have columns. By the way, because we tend to think that those people in the South did this, and we're not those people. Mississippi has the highest number of lynchings, but after that it's Missouri. Midwest, every state that touches us had lynchings. Oklahoma had 76 documented there. Missouri had 60. Nebraska had them. Colorado had them. You know, we aren't clean out here. I mean, we need to come to grips with that history. So here is, say, you saw the picture of me going down. This is looking around the outside rim of the inside. And once you get into this memorial, you're surrounded by this unsettling but yet beautiful. It's hard to hold the two elements together, but they're there, and this is looking around the outside of it. This is 30 miles from where I grew up. So I took all these pictures, and I was sending them to all my friends, especially pastors, thinking they get all interested, and very few people did. We don't want to talk about it, but 30 miles from where I grew up did have 3 or 4 lynchings. But that is how close one is. The bottoms of the columns are also engraved with the name of the county. You'll see some of those in a few minutes. This is that side view of where the columns go up and the floor goes down, and they're boxes. Very much like a gallows when that is left remaining. It's haunting, and the floor changes, the sound changes in here. It's an amazing, I can't see with the glare. That's Newberry. That was a good picture, but again, you're looking up and you can look around. So this is the back side of the memorial. And you can see they're hanging, but you also have things to see on the outside wall. That is an example of just the exquisite beauty. Here, Benjamin Little was lynched near Mount Pleasant, Texas in 1885 after he was accused of slandering a respectable white family. As you get towards the end, you see this water wall, and the water wall is there in memory of the people who have no names, the people they could not corroborate, the people whom history has not remembered at all, the thousands of lynching victims. And there is what I read at the beginning in the water wall that's engraved there. And while you were hearing the water, you were still seeing more and more of these steel beams. That's, again, one more view of it. It's overwhelming. I firmly believe everybody in this country should go. I have never been to another memorial in the world that has this power. Now, my goal, as I told you when I went, was to find the Salina, Kansas column. And I have not done enough research, but it turns out that the individual county columns got saved for the Deep South. I think Stevenson wanted to make a point. And so Alabama, South Carolina, those all have their individual county columns. Once they get out of the South, most of the lynchings are put onto a state column. And there is a close-up view of all of the lynchings in Kansas. Let's see, Brown County, there were 2, Leavenworth 3, Douglas 3, Shawnee 1, Mission 1, Crawford had 4, Cherokee 1, Labette, is that a county?
Yes.
2, and Pawnee 1. So it's a good swath of it. A lot of the eastern part of the state, but it's not totally that. Beautiful quotes are throughout this whole memorial. This one's from Toni Morrison. Again, just the aesthetics are stunning. Now, when you get outside of the memorial, and you can see it there, it looks pretty austere and menacing to me there. Mass Design Group in Stevenson had a brilliant but manipulative idea. And here comes my idea for us. They made 2 of every one of these steel beams, these steel columns. So one is hanging in the memorial and will always hang in the memorial. These, if you look at them laid out here, they look like coffins on a battlefield. That was my feel. And one of the guards said, well, you know, we want to make a garden here. This needs to be a garden. But this one is for all of the counties or states to take home and to own the horrible truth, to somehow, you can't make atonement, but to somehow work on it. And honesty is a good place to begin. And to work on that and take them home. And if you don't do it, there it is for the whole world to see that you have chosen not to deal with your history. And this is, I believe I kept getting the wrong picture in it. This is, yes, this is the Kansas one, and here is Salina, right here with Dan Adams, April the 20th. We're coming up on that anniversary, 1893. So there we are, out there for everybody to see that we haven't dealt with it. And again, another picture. I talked to Senator Hardy when I got back because of course, I mean, Kansans want to do something about that, and he suggested 2 places because it's not a Salina still, that it needs to be in Topeka, State House grounds, or there is a State History Museum in Topeka. Someone, one of us, one of your friends, one of your colleagues, seems to me to be a project to begin to connect with the counties who were named there, with the Kansas people, and somehow, and help us bring this back to Kansas. I don't think we're doing ourselves any favors when we say we're not racist. And I hear that all the time. When I talk about race over at Sunrise, people say, but there were no black people in my class at school. I don't know any black people, so I'm not racist. This has happened, and this happened here. And if you go upstairs and get the microfilm, you'll discover that Dan Adams, or Dana Adams as he's called in the newspaper articles, that when you read that account of the lynching, it's one of the most detailed accounts I've ever read. And the reporter says, but no one at all was recognized. Really? There's a mob in Salina, Kansas. We would know people. This came from here. This is, just by the way, that's Oklahoma's casket. They call them caskets when they're out in the yard, but that is a lot of people and a lot of recognition. We tend to think now that Martin Luther King, Ralph Abernathy, we would talk about the leaders. What became all too clear to me, especially when I was in the museums in Birmingham and in Memphis, Birmingham and the Rosa Parks Museum, is that it was church people. And it was mainly church women. So for the League of Women Voters, I was stunned. The whole Montgomery bus boycott was orchestrated by a bunch of church women who got the men to do the drive. They used the funeral cars to go take people to work, and the church women stayed up at night and mimeographed things out of their prayer group to hand out to people not to go ride the buses. But it came out of ordinary people. And at the same time, I'm reminded that it was ordinary people who fought civil rights. It was ordinary church people, so we have them on both sides. But this set of bronzes here is made to honor the history of the women who toiled during the movement, particularly at the Rosa Parks Museum. I read stories of the women who would walk 4 miles to work each way to avoid riding the bus, and then have to cook and clean and take care of children. And I don't know if we do it. The Rosa Parks Museum happens to be about a mile from there. So I went also, and it told stories that I needed to make it complete. But they chose to honor that. They also chose, there is an Ida B. Wells tree grove. There's going to be a forest in honor of her great work. Now, as you leave, I'm going the wrong way. As you leave the memorial, another just incredible bronze. This again is on their website. I think this is an African artist, I'm not positive. Again, reminds me of the Hands Up. Just a few years ago, more, and again, just the hands up, the headshot, the horror of terror. We talk about terror in our country now, and we worry about it. This was terror that was invoked on black people across this country and was sanctioned. You know, it's not even a hate crime now to do that, and it happened, and people did not do much about it. We didn't like it. Some people didn't like it, but what were they going to do? The Klan comes into it. The citizens' councils come into it. But again, I wasn't planning to go into that history. I simply wanted to show you this memorial and to make a plea to let's get that thing home to Kansas. I really think it needs to come here. And otherwise, people will walk down and say, you know, why is it there? Now, attached to, it's about a half a mile away, the memorial, there's 2 pieces of what Brian Stevenson has done. In Montgomery, which has just done a big redevelopment project, Montgomery is built on the river. And so the main part of its downtown was slave warehouses. And for their downtown entertainment district, which is lovely, I enjoyed it. It's just a walking distance from here. The entertainment district is built into warehouses that held slaves. And the museum that is called the Legacy Museum from Enslavement. So I'm not going to call people, that wasn't who they were, something was done to them, they were enslaved, to mass incarceration. And in this small warehouse, Stevenson begins with actual holograms of enslaved people in the warehouse telling their stories. And I was there the middle of June last summer, and if you remember what was happening on the border, and we were getting the audios of the children, I've lost my mama, where's my, people were just standing weeping because it sounds the same no matter what language you're speaking or what color you are if you've been taken away. The museum also then documents what happens from the time slavery ends, and they document Jim Crow, signs that I had seen in my youth, again from Greenville, Texas, from where I was in there. They have in this museum a bell jar of dirt from every lynching site they have been able to document. So that would be something they would want from Kansas, is dirt from the lynching sites. I know right after Charlottesville happened, the Charlottesville people had some type of service at the site of a lynching in Charlottesville, got the dirt and drove it to Montgomery to help do something. But the Legacy Museum helps us come to grips with mass incarceration, with lack of representation, with the huge disparities. And I know it's a difficult topic, but it is a powerful place to go, and so I encourage you to do it. And I've almost talked for 45 minutes, and do you have any questions?
And over the years, I discovered the biggest racists are those who said to me, but I didn't grow up with any black people, and I don't even know any. And they were by far top of the list.
Well, the incarceration is,
It's systemic.
it's systemic in how the bail system in particular, how the fact that poverty has, if you're impoverished and you can't hire a lawyer, you know, you may have a good free lawyer, but the one here in town, last year I knew somebody that was using her, and she had 45 other cases in like 5 counties. Now how can she do due diligence? And she was doing her best, but it's just not going to be the same as if you hire your own lawyer. And how does that happen? I think these are in things. Any more questions?
How old would you think children would need to be before you took them to something like that and talked to them about it?
I saw particularly several black dads with their kids who were elementary aged, and they were explaining it. And then,
I mean, I think about my grandchildren, and I'm sure they won't be exposed to that unless we do it. And, you know, we take them to the national parks and we do that kind of thing, and this would be a whole different thing. I'm just not sure how old they would need to be before you could.
I think 4th grade, 3rd, 4th grade. We talk about stuff
That's about how old they
at
are.
Sunrise. I would do it because they can appropriate. I think you can talk about that, what it means to be courageous, what it means to do justice, and help them get a framework. But if they don't hear it from you, we're going to repeat the history. I wish it's moved in the number of small groups. It's a very sacred atmosphere. I didn't say that. People whisper. There's very little selfie taking. In fact, they won't let you take selfies with the statues if you can believe you want to. But it's a very hushed atmosphere. There were a few college groups, and they seemed a bit restive, but even college freshmen seemed to settle down and understand this was much a holy place.
I wanted to just add that we were in New Orleans and went down to the Whitney Plantation, which is the one that's devoted to
Yes, I've heard
preserving the
that.
life of the slaves. And it was, it coincided a lot with what you're saying. But one of the pictures in the museum, before you walk out on the grounds, is of New Orleans. It's a map of New Orleans and the Mississippi River from New Orleans up Baton Rouge. And of course, the whole history of the French colonists and so forth. But what's striking about this picture is that they show you the plantations, sugarcane plantations, and there are hundreds of them. And they are solid all the way along that line. And of course, harvesting that sugarcane was an economic engine, going back to the ports and taking it out. And that economic part
Many of those were owned by the,
of the origins is really striking.
yeah.
You said earlier about all the things we can't do, but the things we can do is tell the story. And there's a book called The Sun Does Shine by a man named
That's
Anthony
it.
Ray Hinton. And it goes through years and years and years of him being on death row and how Brian Stevenson came into play. I mean, it was just an amazing story. And it really changed me.
It
Reading
changed
that
me.
book, because we know the one-liners or the topic sentences, but this was 35 years of.
On the EJI website, there's a video of this young woman who goes with her aunts and grandma to go investigate the lynching of one of her great-grandfather, I think. And it's only about 10 minutes, and I showed it to the high school kids at church, and it's not so gruesome that you wouldn't want a kid to watch it, but it just tells the story of this successful black businessman in, I think it was Florida, but maybe like, I don't know what else, some other state. And they go and they find his name in the register of deeds for owning this his store, and then they find out that the store was burned down and he was lynched, and they take the dirt and put it in the jar so they can put it in the museum. The other thing I was gonna say is one time we accidentally checked out the mini-series at the library here called Slavery. And we thought it was a movie, so we started watching it, and went on and on and on. And we had to watch it in about 3 segments because it went on so long, but it was very eye-opening that slavery got harsher and harsher as the idea of freedom
Yeah.
became more and more possible. And anyway, I had a friend a very well-educated friend who said, well, my Irish ancestors were treated like slaves when they were here. And I said, if you think your Irish ancestors were treated like slaves, you don't know enough about slavery.
That's the economic motive. There was an uprising along these plantations, and 90 of these people who were in the uprising had their heads put on pikes along the road.
Yeah,
And
that's
there's a
in Jill
visual
Ford's
representation of that. Those people, those slaves, were compensated by the insurance companies to the slave owners who killed them. They got compensation back from the insurance companies, which went back to East Coast,
This goes
New
back to
York
the-
companies who were underwriting this because it was a business.
Yes.
And
And
slaves yeah.
they were like machinery.
One slave owner was in debt, he sold all of his slaves, $250,000, they were all split into different families. It's striking.
In Loudness County, there's actually a very powerful national park site. This was where sharecroppers registered to vote. And in order to vote, you have to have an address. And so when the people who owned their land discovered they'd registered to vote, they threw them out of their houses. So somehow, I think the guy was black, but I'm not sure. He might not have been. He owned some property in Loudness County, and he just let all these people come camp on his land. Now, if you can imagine camping in South Alabama, I mean, I don't want to camp in Salina. But this is in the middle of the marsh and mosquitoes and snakes, and it's nasty, and they stayed there for 2 years in tents so they could vote.
Thank you. John Burchell, who is one of the bagpipers featured in the Currents magazine, came to the paper a week or so ago, is the man who has researched Salina's lynching the best. He's got the newspaper stories from both, all the Salina papers, there were more than one in those days, and the Abilene paper. Abilene actually taunted Salina for not lynching somebody prior to the time that Dana or Dan, we're not sure which his correct legal name is, was lynched. But he had admitted guilt to a minor crime. He was being put on the train to go to prison up at Leavenworth County, at Lansing at Kansas state, and he was pulled off the train and hung in our Union Station vicinity.
They pulled the pin off the car.
Yeah, they broke the
And
train.
so he was on the car with the sheriff's deputy.
Sheriff's deputies
And
couldn't or didn't.
they pulled the pin and the train took off, and there he is, and that's when the mob descended on him.
It's a grim story. Burchell told it at the libraries Thursday night, talk about notorious Kansas. And so the question is, should we try to get some more people together, John Burchell particularly, and Martha, and other interested parties, and really make a serious effort to bring our part of this memorial back to Kansas?